Educational Communications and this station present Environmental Directions with Nancy Perlman. On this series, we explore the effects of human influence on the Earth's ecosystems and discuss solutions to environmental problems which affect the quality of life on this planet. Environmental Directions gives you the kind of information you need to help you participate in decisions impacting your community, the nation, and the world. Now, here's your host, Nancy Perlman.
Hello. For the next half hour, we are going to be talking about eco-preservation, especially the future of the Randall Preserve in Orange County, California, with my guest, Melanie Schlotterbeck. She is the stewardship consultant for the Coastal Corridor Alliance, formerly the Banning Ranch Conservancy. She has worked in many positions in the past in ecosystem preservation and is also the chair on the Brea Planning Commission. She has been honored as an Orange County visionary by the Los Angeles Times and many resolutions from the state legislature. Welcome. It's a pleasure to have you with us again.
Thank you so much for the invitation.
You have been so active in making sure that some of the unique wild areas that are left in Southern California are preserved and protected. And you have led the effort with the nonprofit Banning Ranch Conservancy, which now we call the Banning Ranch the Randall Preserve. It sits at the mouth of the Santa Ana River where Huntington Beach, Newport Beach, and Costa Mesa come together. So let's begin with your describing what is on these 387 acres that are being protected.
Great question. We enjoy this land because of its situation. You noted that it was next to Newport Beach, Huntington Beach, Costa Mesa, but also the Santa Ana River. And it is within the tidal zone for the Pacific Ocean, which is just a couple hundred feet away from the property. There are more than 18 sensitive, threatened, and endangered species on the land, which is a really large number for this property, especially in such an urban area. And the 387 acres actually connects a lot of different other open space properties together. For example, a property owned by the city of Newport Beach called Sunset Ridge, an Army Corps of Engineers salt marsh, and Orange County Parks has its Talbert Regional Park just above it. So with these 387 acres, the lands are now connected into about 1,000 acres of contiguous land at the mouth of the Santa Ana River.
I remember back in the 1960s and 70s, riding my horse from Santa Ana down the Santa Ana River, 20 miles to the conjunction of the river and the coast. And there was a lot more open space back then. It's been developed, but of course it has always been used, especially with 80 plus years of oil operations. Is that still going on?
Oil operations have actually ceased a number of years ago. And right now, the Banning Ranch property, now called the Randall Preserve, is getting cleaned up from that oil history. And wells are being plugged and capped and leveled below grade for protective measures. The soil is being remediated. All the piping and infrastructure related to the oil operations is being removed. And that's one of the reasons, even though the land is in public ownership right now, that the public isn't allowed on it. That's a huge liability. So we're making sure that through the requirements of state and local agencies, the oil operations are cleaned up to an appropriate level for open space, and then it will be safe for humans to be on the property more full-time than they are right now.
When I started my environmental activism full-time, it seems, in the 70s and 80s, I was working with many other organizations to save the Newport Back Bay, the Bolsa Chica, wetlands. Is there any connection to these properties?
There is a connection. We actually call the coastal corridor not only land that goes from the coast up to about Adams Street, which is the tidal influence zone, but also up and down the coast to Bolsa Chica and Upper Newport Bay. And it's mainly because birds, when they're flying in the sky, look down and see open spaces that are available to them to land, to nest, to breed, to find food and forage. And all of these systems are connected from the bird's point of view, but not necessarily from the landscape level, because there's urban developments and housing and roads that separate these open spaces from one another. But from a wildlife perspective, especially birds, it is still connected.
Indeed, birds don't recognize the political boundaries.
They do not.
Is there any kind of wildlife corridor for the land animals, or are they pretty much isolated at the particular places?
In this particular instance, with the 1,000 acres and the Randall Preserve, it is isolated. It's surrounded by development on 3 sides and basically the ocean on the 4th side. So what you would normally see in an intact habitat is a high-level predator. Our highest level predator is a coyote. And so we do have a suite of species, from bunnies and possums and raccoons, but we don't have our highest level, which means the ecosystem is functioning, but it's not functioning the way it historically had.
Is this Randall Preserve considered a wetland?
Part of it is a wetland. The property is divided into kind of 2 geographies. There's an upper mesa, which is a little bit more than half the property. And then there's a lowlands area where there used to be tidal ingress into the property. So the ocean water, as the tides go in and out, would fill up the wetlands for shorebirds to enjoy and other wetland species, and then drain out as the tides clear. But we also have freshwater marsh on the lowlands also, where it's at the bottom of a watershed, basically. So the water is draining from our urban areas onto the property, and we have freshwater and saltwater.
A marsh, a wetland, is very important as an exchange between the land and the ocean. And fish and ocean life depends on that as a fishery. Could you describe what kind of species from the ocean are found there?
I actually don't know that we've found any species from the ocean per se. It's quite a route that they have to take to get to the Randall Preserve. They would go from the ocean up the Santa Ana River, and they would have to enter the Army Corps salt marsh through one of 2 tidal gates in the levee along the Santa Ana River before they could make it into the Randall Preserve geography. The landscape ultimately houses more birds than anything else. We've seen over 150 bird species on the property. We do a lot of bird monitoring there once a month, and we've been doing it for a couple of years through a partnership with Sea and Sage Audubon Society. So we've got endangered bird species, raptors, owls, a lot of really fun things to look at.
The bird species, some of them live there year round, but it's also a migratory stopping off. So what other species can a bird watcher see?
We've got California coastal gnatcatcher, we've got Leisbell's vireo, Ridgway's rail, osprey, redtail hawks, red-shouldered hawks, Costa's hummingbirds, Anna's hummingbirds, everything from the small birds up to the big birds, raptors down to the pollinators.
The larger animals need the smaller insects, reptiles to eat. Are there enough lizards, frogs, and other critters that the birds can enjoy?
I'm going to say yes to that because we have so many species on the property. One of the best examples I have of how our ecosystems are supposed to work is that we have a top-level predator, and they keep other populations in check, like the deer population. And if the deer don't exist, that sets off a cascade of other problems. All of these end up being cascading problems, but when you have populations that don't have a top-level predator that is maintaining the balance, everything from birds to reptiles to amphibians, all the way down to the plants are impacted.
It's definitely important to maintain a balance. When we think of preserving and protecting ecosystems, we obviously focus on the larger animals, the birds, the mammals. The little creatures are important, but the plant life is critical to both the animals and to the ecosystem. So do you have to preserve and protect the native species there? Are there invasive species that you have to get rid of?
There are quite a few invasive species on this property. We've got black mustard, which folks always love. It's the yellow flower that you see on the hillsides, planted during the times when missions were set up in and around California. One of the more concerning species is pampas grass, because once that particular plant blooms, the seeds become airborne and easily spread to other locations. We're also focusing on Arundodonax, which is called the giant reed, and that particular plant was brought over to stabilize creeks and rivers. But what they found is that it's incredibly hardy, and you can get rid of it, but it just keeps coming back. Another project that I'm working on, we've spent 20 years trying to clear the watershed of Arundo. And so Coastal Corridor Alliance is in this for the long haul, and we are hoping that our restoration project at Fairview Park ends up expanding onto the Randall Preserve, where we can work with the title holder, Mountains Recreation and Conservation Authority, and some of the tribes that are culturally affiliated with this property to bring back more native species on the plant side than presently exist.
Do you have to reintroduce any native plants or animals?
We do. We are looking at reintroducing white sage. That's one of the species that's missing on the property, and it is a culturally significant plant as well.
I mentioned that I had ridden my horse from Santa Ana to the ocean. I also rode my horse the other way. The Santa Ana River goes about 50 miles into Riverside County, not just Orange County. When I was younger, it was sandy. Sad to say, in the 80s, the Army Corps of Engineers basically paved the river. Now, that means that the flow of sand and other ingredients that are necessary for an ecosystem aren't getting down there. What have you done to compensate for the lack of flow of the traditional water and sand?
The watershed for the Santa Ana River actually starts in the mountains by Big Bear, and it goes 110 miles through San Bernardino, Riverside, and Orange County. It's the largest watershed in Southern California. Because of that, and because of the urban nature of this watershed, there are a lot of problems and predicaments that we face, and lack of silt, those fine particulate silt materials provide habitat for certain species at the mouth of the Santa Ana River. We are looking at restoration opportunities that allow increased wetlands on the Randall Preserve, but we don't have the science in just yet on that. So it might involve new tidal gate, it might involve a culvert that allows additional water onto the Randall Preserve, but we are looking at restoration opportunities. What happens upstream certainly impacts what's happening downstream. So we're attentive to that fact as well. And outside of our work on the Randall Preserve, we also host beach cleanups once a month, because a watershed that drains 3 counties has a lot of trash at the mouth of the river. So those beach cleanups on the 4th Saturday of every month are quite popular, and we have folks that are regulars, school groups, even surfers come and help clean up the trash. And we've basically adopted the mouth of the Santa Ana River to clean it up and get all the debris, styrofoam, microplastics, yard signs, wood, all sorts of things out of the river mouth.
In addition to the trash, there must be a lot of toxic pollutants that are going into the area. How are you handling that?
That is outside the scope of our work. We are not focused on water quality. We rely on our friends at Orange County Coastkeeper to help with that, and Surfrider Foundation. But we are attentive to the fact that the folks that are in the watershed that may choose to use pesticides should use them in the most limited capacity possible, because anything that you put on your lawn or in your car has the potential to drain into this watershed and therefore into the ocean. So we try to do public service announcements to tell people about that.
We talk about the birds using the area, and I recall when the river was sandy, had water, and a lot of little marshy areas in it, that the birds, like the heron, could get food. And then when it was paved, the herons discovered my family's fish pond, and the fish disappeared because the birds needed it. Have we seen any kind of revival and help for these animals that need the natural ecosystems?
We have. There are some restoration opportunities going on within this 1,000 acres that we're working within. I'll point to the Huntington Beach Wetlands Conservancy. They're doing an exceptional job restoring the coastal wetlands there. Again, the Army Corps Salt Marsh has extensive habitat for bird species to fish in. And we're hoping to extend that onto the Randall Preserve as we finish our planning process.
We're going to talk more about those planning processes and about the Randall Preserve in Orange County and ecosystem preservation with my guest, Melanie Schlotterbeck, when we return in a moment.
Environmental Directions with Nancy Perlman continues with further discussion of the world's critical ecological issues. For more information, you may call 310-559-9160 or go to www.ecoprojects.org. Now, here's Nancy.
I'm speaking with Melanie Schlotterbeck. She is the stewardship consultant for the Coastal Corridor Alliance, formerly the Banning Ranch Conservancy. We're talking about this wonderful area that you're working so hard to protect at the mouth of the Santa Ana River between Huntington Beach, Newport Beach, Costa Mesa. The Banning Ranch Conservancy changed its name, and now also the Banning Ranch is called the Randall Preserve. But give us a little history about the names and who lived there, which indigenous people lived there, which Spanish land grants, which European colonizers. Bring us up to the present.
Sure. So the Randall Preserve, going back to the previous name, Banning Ranch, the Banning family owned the property, a gentleman named Phineas Banning. It was in their family for a long time before it was sold by the family for oil development. And that was the last 80 years of this property's experience was oil operations, pulling out of the Newport Inglewood Fault oil from the ground. We had a very generous donor, gentleman by the name of Frank Randall, and his wife Joanne stepped forward when we were working to preserve this property, and they committed $50 million to the acquisition price, and the property ended up receiving $47 million of state and federal funding to complete what is one of the largest transactions I've ever been involved with, which was $97 million. That's huge, but this was the last large undeveloped coastal land between Ventura and Mexico. But looking at the history beyond the Banning family and the Randall name, prior to that, there were various indigenous tribes that either had shared territory or lived along the Santa Ana River together. And that is being researched right now in an ethnographic study being done by the title holders to the Randall Preserve, which is a joint powers authority called the Mountains Recreation and Conservation Authority.
You're doing many, many different studies, but you are in a planning process where you have 3 plans: the resource management plan, the public access plan, and the coastal resilience strategy. The latter is where you're focusing on the lowlands of the property, how it will be impacted by sea level rise, high tides, king tides, coastal flooding. Obviously, the public access plan, you want the public to use it, but right now you have to protect it and study it. So that is in the future. And of course, it's absolutely critical that we understand how the ecological components of the preserve are going to be giving protection to the plants and animals. Let's describe each plan. Is there a current listing of how many species of plants there are, how many land mammals there are, how many ocean animals are connected, how many reptiles, how many insects?
There are a lot of species on this particular property, and while the plans that cover the biological side of things haven't been released just yet, we do have documents from the previous development proposal for the development called Newport Banning Ranch. And we know that there are 18 sensitive, threatened, or endangered species on this property. More recently, we have discovered another one, which is a state-listed species called the Crotch's bumblebee, and that's a native bumblebee to this region. We have done a lot of studies on species. One of our smaller species is the San Diego fairy shrimp, and that little crustacean only comes out when the rains have developed pools on the property called vernal pools. It's a form of a wetland. And these vernal pools are one of only 2 complexes recognized by U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, which is the federal organization responsible for protecting wildlife species. So there's only 2 recognized in Orange County, and one of them is on this property. So these little crustaceans may be small, but they are mighty. And we also have larger species on the property that on the bird and avian side of things. So coastal California gnatcatcher, least Bell's vireo, Savannah sparrow, Ridgway rail. And then of course we have raptors, which are protected under the Migratory Bird Act. And then more commonly, we would see something like coyotes and bunnies, raccoons, possums.
You work with many other organizations, such as the Mountains Recreation and Conservation Authority. What is that?
The Mountains Recreation and Conservation Authority, or MRCA, they are a joint powers authority created through a partnership of 3 public park agencies. And they are actually the owners of the Randall Preserve. They hold the title to the property, and we are working in partnership with them to do the 3 plans, but they're also working on a 4th plan, a tribal access and engagement plan. Through Tribal Engagement Officer Liam Walsh is working with and coordinating with all of the tribes that are culturally affiliated with the land that choose to participate. And all 4 of these plans then are part of what will make the Randall Preserve a unique and special place for tribes to enjoy, as well as the public.
When the public does get access, are you going to have walkways, a nature center, self-guided nature walk?
We are hoping that the public can provide us with their wish list of things they want to do on the property. So absolutely, there will be plenty of trails. If you view the property from an aerial perspective from up above, you're going to see a lot of roadways, and all of those roadways related to the oil operations on the property. And so we're going to get rid of a lot of roadways because they're not necessary anymore. In working with our planning team at Dudek, they are developing preliminary plans and will probably have a phased access allowed on the property. And that basically means we're not going to open up all 387 acres at once. We're going to kind of find our sea legs first and make sure that we've got all of our ducks in a row, the plants and animals are protected, and humans have access that is appropriate and potentially seasonal in nature. For example, we talked about the vernal pools. We want to make sure those are protected. And so if there is a trail that happens to go through a vernal pool, that trail may be shut down. Ultimately, the goal would be to provide overlooks, interpretive programs, educational programs, and I would be remiss if I didn't say that there are other organizations and tribal nations that are interested in this particular area, and even academic institutions that want to do research, programming, and restoration and cultural programs as well.
Because you are there on the coast, you are near a major thoroughfare, the Pacific Coast Highway. Does that intersect the property?
It actually borders the property in one location, but it does not bisect the property. So we're near to it and we touch it right on the southeast corner.
In the meantime, since the public isn't able to enjoy the area directly, they can have a cinematic drone tour of the property by checking out your new story map, which features on the ground video at randallpreserve.org. And Randall is spelled RANDALLPRESERVE.org. But you also have another website for your organization?
Correct, coastalcorridor.org, and folks can learn about the other programs that we offer, including our arts and parks. We've got a coastal discovery tour where we take folks out into nature, and then we've got a restoration project that we're working on at Fairview Park. And all of those are accessible on Saturdays to families and community members interested in participating. But the randallpreserve.org website is the one dedicated to the planning process presently underway between Coastal Corridor Alliance and the Mountains Recreation and Conservation Authority.
That other website is www.coastalcorridor.org. You have so much incredible information available for the public. They need to be involved to help your preservation efforts. But tell me about this final plan, the Coastal Resilience Strategy.
The Coastal Resilience Strategy looks at all of the various hydrologic and oceanic impacts that could potentially happen on the property. So we are planning for about 4.9 feet of sea level rise to impact the property. And so if 4.9 feet of sea level rise were to occur, we are studying what that does to the lowlands on the property. And the reality is it covers most of the lowlands because that's a lot of water to have to absorb. And if it's not going up the Santa Ana River in that channelized location, then it's spreading out onto the land. So lower level areas are going to be impacted. And we're hoping that this property can absorb some of those impacts in a natural way, as opposed to flooding neighborhoods. When it comes to things like high tides or king tides, those are special tidal events related to our natural systems. And you'll see high tides happen throughout the day, rotating between low tides and high tides. And then coastal flooding, as another example, is when we have a lot of rainfall that our man-made systems can't quite handle a massive amount of water, and we get coastal flooding. So again, those low-lying areas get impacted by water, whether it's ocean water or rainwater.
You have worked with other organizations in other areas to protect other locations. How important is the Randall Preserve as opposed to the Chino Hills or to the other Southern California ecosystems that you have been very active with your entire life trying to save?
Every acre is an acre that needs to be saved. If there's an acre that can be purchased at the coast, it should be purchased. If there's an acre inland or one part of a wildlife corridor, every opportunity we have to protect lands we should take, because once they're gone for good.
Having grown up in Orange County, lived in Los Angeles County, I've seen too many areas destroyed by housing tracts, commercial development. I'm so happy that we've been able to save little pockets, but are we ever going to be able to reconnect all these wild areas?
I hope so. I think ultimately a lot of organizations in the conservation arena are looking at wildlife corridors to connect existing open spaces together and natural landscapes. Thankfully, voters recently just passed Proposition 4, which allocates $10 billion, billion with a B, that will allow for acquisition projects, restoration projects over the next 5 to 7 years. And hopefully we'll be getting additional lands protected because of that money, and planning projects and restoration projects underway. But it all comes down to somebody needs to be willing to step up and fight for the land. And as it relates to Coastal Corridor Alliance, our board president, Terry Welsh, was the guy who figured out that these developments were happening and being proposed along the coast and chose to get involved, number one, and number two, has stuck with it for more than 25 years.
You are obviously committed to sticking with it for your lifetime, I'm sure. I'm so pleased that you have taken an interest in preserving this area, protecting it, trying to make it available both to the wildlife and to the humans. Thank you so very much for your good work. Thank you so very much for being my guest.
So appreciate the opportunity to be here. The Randall Preserve is a beautiful location in and around the Santa Ana River mouth. The Coastal Corridor Alliance is extremely excited to have folks participate in our public planning process in May and June. We hope that individuals engage in this planning process. We want to create a nature preserve that everyone can enjoy.
Thank you for your efforts. I have been speaking with Melanie Schlotterbeck, who is the stewardship consultant with the Coastal Corridor Alliance, formerly the Banning Ranch Conservancy. I'm Nancy Perlman. Thank you very much for joining us, and do tune in again next week.
If you would like free information about these environmental issues, go to www.ecoprojects.org or call 310-559-9160. Environmental Directions with your host, Nancy Perlman, is a community affairs program of the nonprofit organization Educational Communications and this station.